Excellent. Well, we're going to have a few people filter in, but we want to go ahead and get started and make the most of our time. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I know with all the great choices, it's really hard to decide where you want to go. Every hour is so valuable, so thank you so much for coming here. A few things that I've written up here is, for a lot of people, you're live tweeting during this and following it. The hashtag for the event is BBCCon. My Twitter handle, although I'm not an active broadcaster, is @HansEckman, and a copy of the presentation is available now at hanseckman.com as well as on the BBC website. So with anything, we've got to start with a few ground rules, and the first is, this section's for you. I put this together, so I'm really familiar with this, so what's really valuable is the discussion we have during this. You need to participate, to be a part of this, to get the most out of it. I want everybody coming out of here saying they had a great time, they made a great choice, and really feeling good about the presentation. If you don't, then it's because you did not tell me what I'm missing, what you wanted to hear, what wasn't there. So please, interrupt me anytime there's clarifications, there's going to be discussions on parts of this. Also, the full disclaimer, the content in this presentation and any comments I make are the sole responsibility of me and may not represent SunTrust Banks as an entity. But please consider us for your banking needs. Also, no animals were harmed in the creation of this presentation, but please do support your local rescue groups. And make sure throughout the day, throughout the conference, to connect and share on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. Contact information's at the end. And also I have business cards up on the front row, which thank you to two people for taking advantage of front row seating. So, we're talking about setting a strategic goal. And goal setting may or may not be troublesome for organizations. It's easy to set goals. Knowing whether you're setting the right goals can be challenging. But what a lot of organizations forget is that setting goals doesn't matter if you don't have the right structure, the right people in place to actually make those goals happen. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find and gather the change agents. Who are the people in the organization? Who are the people outside your organization who can actually make things change to accomplish those goals? Nothing happens if you don't have people that make different decisions. So you've got to identify those change agents and pull them together. Next, you've got to determine what is your desired outcome. Or, as they say in Switch, what is your destination postcard? If 5 years, 10 years from now, you're up here doing a presentation describing the amazing transformation you did at your company, what's it going to look like? How do you know you were successful? That destination postcard is what has to be communicated to your organization. You also have to script the critical steps, and we'll talk a little bit about at the end why you can't script everything. But there's certain milestones. There's certain steps that you have to take to achieve that goal that you have to start setting out ahead of time. Next, you have to create a mechanism for change. There has to be something, some driving force, the people, the processes, the support, the backup plans, the backup to the backup to the backup to the backup plans when things don't go well. You have to have these in to continue to drive the organization to the right goals. And the second is, stuff is going to change. Your business drivers are going to change. Your organization is going to change. Your stakeholders are going to change. You've got to continuously evaluate and update your vision and the support structure that's a part of that. So if you are a change agent, if you are trying to enact change in the organization, there is no book I can recommend more than Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. Phenomenal book, very easy to read, very easy to follow. So let's step back a second before we get into this and say, how many people, by show of hands, coming out of high school, college, or post-grad, knew that what they were going to be, their career was a BA? That was all they were going to do. That was their life. They knew what it meant. It was no problem finding a job that matched exactly. They had found their home. All right, perfect score. Who started anything but the role that they're in today? That's the reality of our life. Most organizations, and although this does apply to really any strategic vision you're trying to set, I'm really going to focus in on the BA business analysis specifically, is that your BA community isn't a bunch of people that are perfectly tuned as BAs. These are developers, these are testers, these are project managers who grew up and become BAs. These are other roles, other people who found a calling or were forced into the role. So you're dealing with a diverse group. So when we faced this at SunTrust, one of the first things we had to do was we had to create really the BA community. So what the company did in 2007 was, first, we switched from a decentralized, siloed organization over to a matrixed organization, which meant we had professional development managers over BAs, professional development managers over PMs, over developers, over architects. And they were responsible for all the training, reviews, HR, all the staffing aspects. So by pooling the BAs together, we created basically a BA community that could share information. But we had people that didn't know what BAs were. We had people that were note takers, we had people that were testers, we had data analysts, system analysts. So one of the first things we did was select one of the IIBA certified training partners. In this case, we used B2T training. And we set up a core training course that was tied to the BABOK so that we could now really enforce what was going to become the international standard for BAs and get all of our BAs the same training, the same experience. Even if they were lifelong BAs, we wanted to bring them up to speed at really the SunTrust and the standard way of doing things. We also had to implement new practices, new processes, new methodology, a new requirements management tool we selected, all trying to solidify and make the BA role practical. So, yes? The Requisite Pro by IBM was selected for us.
Selected for you?
Yes.
So the BAs had no input into the tooling?
We had lots of input. We ranked the top providers, 1 through 8, and that was provided for selection, and then another tool was selected. So let me say it this way. So if you are using the Rational Suite, Requisite Pro is phenomenal. If you are using it as a standalone, or doing something other than narrative requirements, or use case driven, sort of, and this is 2007, there were tools that I think served the BA's needs better, but this one fit the organization and where they were going. Since then, we've switched and we're using HP's Application Lifecycle Manager, primarily because that was the testing platform. We had it licensed, and we decided to unify on that tool set instead. But again, that was one where the tool was somewhat pre-selected, and then we implemented and decided how the tool was going to work. There were some other hands that popped up. Yes, sir?
So what was the problem you guys were trying to fix? What was your problem?
That we had a diverse group of people called BAs that were not doing anything related to BA work. We had tons of people that had been moved into a BA role but had no idea what it was. We were bringing in BAs who were receiving nothing but conflict because nobody in the organization knew how to use a BA. So we had to communicate out what a BA was to the organization and build out the practice, and then build out the competency, a base level of competency, understanding, standardization, so that the organization would have confidence and start using the BAs better. So that was really what at the time it was called the 2010 plan. By the year 2010, we wanted to have a distinct role-based organization built out.
Did you have financial goals for this? Did you predict X amount of efficiencies, or how did you get the checks?
I don't know if they did or not, and my colleague Russ Pena is here at the conference, but he's not here in the room. He was part of this initiative. There were beliefs that by improving competency across all the roles and introducing tools and a methodology that we could follow, that we would be able to dramatically reduce our development life cycle, reduce some of the rework. We're an area of massive, big projects. So the idea was we would be able to start breaking those up into smaller efforts. And it was successful, but as a financial driver, that wasn't one of the primary goals. It was more of a quality and a speed to market. Other questions on kind of the foundation?
Well,
Yep.
you said you moved to a role-based professional development management model. That means all EAs report to one manager,
Yep.
basically, and then you were just put on.
Yep, and then you are assigned out to a work stream aligned to a certain area of the business, and then from there, the work stream assigned and managed people on projects. So to get resources for your project, you go through the development managers to bring in resources.
And did the professional development manager assign the VA to those work streams?
Yes, yep. There was some bartering, there was some stealing, so as with anything, your top VAs are always in the highest demand, and the most critical need of the business typically is going to get the best people.
So did you call them separately for Agile and Waterfall? You call them separately, or?
At the time, we were exclusively Waterfall. Only in the last couple of years have we successfully implemented Agile, and that's only among our digital channels. So that's been a new change, and it's also been a change for the BAs. In some cases, we've brought in more Agile Scrum talent. In other areas, we've brought in a company to train that organization and redo how they deliver projects. So one of the things that, with the questions that you're driving at is, you've got to understand, even here, before we even get into what the strategic goals were, we had to establish a foundation. So one of the questions is, what is the foundation? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What are your constraints? And that's what's coming out in the questions, and that's awesome because that's really where you need to start. So with this plan, we knew we could get all BAs trained, all BAs up to a certain competency level. They would have a certain level of tools and processes to support them. End of story, we lived happily ever after. Not so much. And the reason being is we had some change agents who weren't happy. We hated our templates. We hated the way the tools were being used. We hated the fact that BAs would always fall back into the roles that they used to have. They weren't fulfilling the full role as they needed to. So we knew where we wanted to get, to the Emerald Cities. We had our traveling companions, but we needed a yellow brick road. We needed to find a way to get there. And that's where our 2020 plan came. And the idea with the 2020 BA 2020 was it was a play on words. Since our foundational project was 2010, where would we be in the year 2020? And this is a 2020 clear vision of where we would be. So this is an area where I want to spend a bit more time, because we sat down and thought through and came up with discrete, measurable goals for our VA practice that did not give us any wiggle room. And I want to bring this up because so that you guys can challenge some of the basis we had. The first one, for any VA employee, we wanted them certified within 2 years of employment. It could be one of the two IIBA certifications. We were using B2T, and they have a certification program. There's professional degrees and online certifications. So we didn't say what, but we wanted to really push accreditation and show that we were following standards. Yes?
Certified within 2 years or what?
So it was a goal. It did not have punishments attached. Other than in our annual review plan, we have personal development goals. By falling short of your goals, it would lower your score. And for those who qualified, it would financially reduce your potential for a bonus if you didn't get it. So if you were missing the mark and weren't hitting your development goals, then yeah, it could cut significantly into your income. Yes?
Why? What were you hoping to accomplish with certification?
One of it was to strengthen and validate the role and the importance of BAs. In our organization, it was extremely PM-driven, which meant PMI, PMP certification was really kind of the goal. Those were the people who were seen in the highest light. We wanted to show that the BA practice and the BAs were just as important. We also wanted to have people take their jobs very seriously and see that this was a professional career. This was something real. And also it weeds out the people that were just in the wrong role. We had a lot of people that just did not like the new model. It didn't fit in. They wanted to go back to testing. They wanted to go back to development. They wanted to be more of a data analyst. And this gave an opportunity to basically say, if this isn't your goal, if you don't desire to be accredited in this area, you need to move on. And so it was to weed people out as well. Achievable, too high, crazy, and a waste of time and money. Anyone else? Does your organization at least sponsor or pay for exams or training for certification? See about half, maybe a little more than half. Does any organization require or highly promote or compensate for certification? 1, 2, 3. So about 10 different groups. So it's not as common, but it was something we wanted to push for to help solidify. Another thing, and this was a behavioral change, and behavioral changes are the hardest. The BA had to be recognized as the project team lead. Now, talking about on each of these, how are we going to measure it? Certification, that's easy. How do you measure whether or not somebody is the lead? Part of that's going to have to come from direct and indirect feedback. But we needed to show that the BA was a critical contributor and a driving agent of the project. Because how many people have had projects where the PM or the tech lead sits down and tells the BAs what they're going to do and what their schedule is and what the scope and what the requirements approach is going to be? And does that happen? They've laid it all out, the BA's been excluded from all the meetings because somebody else knows better. We needed to end that and end it quickly. We also needed to change the attitude because a project manager lives from project to project. The BA lives the line of business and the product. The BA is the advocate for the business and the product, which means their knowledge, their value is far greater than a PM because they extend across multiple projects, across multiple domains to help build out that capability. And most PMs would be throwing rotten tomatoes at me if they heard that because they often feel they're the most important part. For that short instance, sure. You know, there's specialty teams. They come in and they do a job and they do it well, and then we're successful and we implement and they disappear. But it's the BA who has to live that day in, day out, even in between projects. Yes, sir.
So who were your key change agents for that shift?
So we worked through the development managers, and actually we formed an illegal community of practice, which then became solidified as a center of excellence. And we went to PM meetings, we went to stakeholder meetings, we sat and started educating and started training. We also did interventions. We sat down with project teams and yelled at PMs, yelled at stakeholders, yelled at delivery managers to get them to use their talent properly. And it's slow. I'd say we're in a much better place now, but I'm still not happy with it. We've still got a lot of work to do. Sir?
So I'm curious about that piece, right? So going out to them and yelling at them and telling them that they have to do. You also mentioned earlier that one of the drivers was having the BAs and able to speak to market.
Yep.
So that partnership with the development team, sometimes the BA can be perceived as being dragging behind.
Yep.
The team. What are your thoughts on how do you make it speak to market and use that?
So part of it is really looking for the pain points and trying to help people understand that if you try and do the old model, you're losing time, you're losing effort. If the developers, they hate recoding. They hate seeing changes in requirements, changing in demand during testing cycles. We were able to show them and prove time and time again that by listening to the BA, they were getting the information that they really needed. So where the developers were even further removed from the stakeholders, the BAs were pulling them into the room, pulling the testers into the room and giving them a context. So the BAs ended up becoming an advocate for the groups doing a lot of the work. And that helped bridge the gap from the back forward. On the stakeholders, it isn't just about yelling. It was also showing them that by leveraging the BA, what value are they getting? How is it going to help their process? No, they didn't believe us. It took many iterations, many projects until they really started feeling comfortable. And back,
I've got something very similar, and I'm just curious to know, you send your BAs to these training, you encourage them to be certified. The culture shift for your stakeholders is one thing, but it's also a shift for your BAs to know what, to have the confidence in being able to say, okay, we've set the ground for the stakeholders to understand this is what you're supposed to do. How are your BAs in accepting that responsibility?
so part of it was within each work stream, we tried to set up coaching models where senior BAs could work with others on specific skills, on specific areas. We also created a work stream BA role, basically a BA coach, mentor, not an HR manager, but basically the lead for that space. And it was their job to shore up and help their organization grow and improve. And then we supported the workstream BAs by talking through their issues, giving them ideas, helping sit down with teams. So a lot of it was very coaching based and also knowledge base driven. We were improving our knowledge base, our templates, we were driving out more information so that people who weren't familiar in an area, they could not just pull up a guide or a template to use, but there was a guide that said, if you don't know anything, ask these questions, and these are the inputs to these areas. But your experienced people, they could just use it as a refresher. One of the areas, not surprisingly, how many people think their company does an adequate job with non-functional requirements? Yeah, we didn't either. Most of our projects didn't even consider it. And what happens? You flip the switch at release weekend, and all of a sudden your customer base cripples your system because you didn't do capacity planning correctly. So by providing them with tools, it improved the reliability of what was being produced, and people started seeing the value. But this was a 5-year transformation, and I'd say last year I would have said we were 80% there, now I'd say we're 60%. Because as we start to see challenges, who's to blame? It's the BA's fault. We're late, we missed stuff, we've got too many changes and requirements and testing. Whose fault is it? It's the BA's fault. And so we're fighting that again. You got a question in stripes?
Yeah, I guess I'm asking why did developers fight it? What are they developing if you're not putting out something developed, right?
Part of it is developers always know best. So they build what they think you want and what they think would be cool.
So you guys just have something in between them and the business.
Yeah.
They thought they could.
Right. So in the old days, it was two neighbors fighting. One would pick up a bag of trash and throw it over the fence. The other would then throw it back over and say, that's what you asked for. And it never matched. There was no collaboration between the business and IT, or little. I'm exaggerating for the purpose here, but so the BAs and supported by management and the rest of the project teams had to bridge that gap. So we had to bring tech leads in to meet with the business and understand what the goals were and what the constraints were. So finally, we started having a routine where if a developer had a constraint, they could bring it forward through the BA, and the business could make a decision whether it was worth the cost. You know, how many people love the word high availability when they get into a requirements session? To me, that means an exponential increase in cost every single time. And businesses always say, well, this is high availability. It can't go off. Really? If I pull the plug on your server right now, what happens to your business? How long can you survive? How much data can you use? Are you willing to spend millions of dollars for that 4-hour, 72-hour, whatever the window was? So we started having those crucial conversations. You got a question back here?
So now the BAs are in power. They have the tool sets, they have everything they need to go up. I'm curious to know, how do you go about selling this to the stakeholders? How are they going to be able to come in and get the stakeholders to listen to them?
Yep. Through subversion, trickery, anything you can. So a lot of it was grassroots. It was sitting down with the BAs. We had monthly meetings, and every meeting we brought a new concept, a new training. We did lunch and learns, we built up knowledge base, so it was giving people the tools so that they were being inserted into the projects without as much direct intervention. At the top, it was trying to, at the right times, at the right meetings, show where we were seeing improvements. So we were trying to tell our stories. We're coming up with case studies that we could then push forward to management and say, hey, guess what? We now have, for the first time ever, a complete requirement specification as is for online banking. And they'd be like, that's ridiculous. And I was like, yeah, it is. We didn't know what our online banking did before. People knew bits of it, but it was never documented. We had a few SMEs. Now we have it on paper. Now we have something we can update. And so they started seeing the value, and it started spreading. And then when it gives, give people a chance to brag. If one unit really was doing well, then they have a chance to brag and say, well, look how good my BAs are doing. Look at what we were able to accomplish. We're delivering 2 months early because of the work the team did. So we tried to find those moments and pit stakeholders against each other to fit into the model faster. But a lot of it, truthfully, it's a lot of grassroots, it's a lot of trickery involved. Yes?
So if I heard you correctly, you said you actually moved the BAs underneath a single man, is that correct?
For HR purposes, yes, they were under development managers who were responsible for all HR activities, all hiring activities, placement, training, professional development. From a day-to-day work and execution standpoint, they were assigned to a single work stream and projects within that work stream. So they still retained domain expertise and structure there, but it offloaded all of the HR and hiring responsibilities and development from the delivery managers who could just focus in on project delivery.
So when that was done, there had to be some sort of pitch for organizational change.
Yes.
Was
Yes.
that a difficult thing to have happen? Because basically telling people, you're going to lose this guy, he's going to come to me and say, which is something I can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah, pulling on.
It made people very bitter, and the whole time there was a lot of fighting. And so 3 years ago, we did another transformation and abolished that model entirely. Decided that it didn't have the value and that we wanted to keep people assigned to certain delivery areas. So they said, now we're going to go back to a instead of a matrix, we're going to go back to a siloed approach. And
is there a risk that what you've accomplished eroded as a result of that?
it absolutely eroded 80% of what we had accomplished. And put everything in a halt, and we had to start all over because I'll hit some of our stakeholders. Our stakeholders don't exist anymore. Our sponsors for the COE and our organization of change don't exist. But the people still did, and the people were so driven that we've continued to do that work despite not having organizational support. So we're still doing the right things, we're just not doing it in a sponsored way anymore. So let me continue on. We've got a lot of great stuff to cover, and I don't want to run out of time here. 90% requirements coverage. Has anyone ever had a project that had 100% requirements coverage? Really? Every possible error scenario, every possible failover, every error handling message? That's awesome. Best 4 lines of code ever deployed.
Yeah, 12 lines of code.
Okay. Would you want it? Is there a value to having 100% coverage? I don't think so. Because the last 10% costs as much as the first 80%. So in our area, we decided that if we had 90% of the core functionality, core error handling, core non-functionals documented, we would be in great shape. And that was our success point. Not 100%, not 80. So could it have been 80? Yes, but 80 gives you so much wiggle room to say, well, we're not going to do error handling. Then we felt 90% would really force people to close out. And this would be something that we would build on. That one is, we haven't figured that one out. So it's a goal, but how do you measure what you don't know? Basically, the BA would have to show what the landscape is and show what was out of scope for requirements. And then it would be kind of a perception of, is what you're leaving out greater than 10%? If so, are you getting sign-off that for this project, this iteration, that's where you're going to stop? And also, this is our 10-year goal. So 10 years from now, we assume that we would have baseline requirements. So 90% shouldn't be hard. And how are you going to put in a new system with less than 90% of it defined? So that was part of where it was. It was 90% for whatever you were putting in. So if it was a change, it should be achievable. But yeah, it's tough. And we never we didn't get to the point where we had the metrics on what the scope of requirements should be enough that we could give people a template to try and filter out and see if they were hitting the 10% mark. Less than 5% missed requirements at sign-off. So what this means, at the time you as a BA sits down and hands off the document and says, this is it, this is ready to go for this piece, you had to miss less than 5%. Now, again, mess with the percentage a little bit, but we felt that this was achievable. And the way we were measuring this is we were doing static testing. So during the requirements process, our testing organization was testing the document against SMART criteria and against ambiguities, and also making sure that they were decomposed enough so that they were testable. We had the developers doing the same thing. So at sign-off, we should have a pretty stable environment. Now, this is missed requirements. If business need changes, if you have a change in project scope, that's not a missed requirement. That is a new requirement. That is a change control to your requirements practice, which is where you need requirements change management. So it was just what the BA should have documented and missed. Less than 2% valid static test defects. Rewording for clarity, decomposing for understanding but not changing the intent is not a static testing defect. How many people here do static testing? Does anyone know what static testing is? Okay, so when your testing organization is testing a product, they're looking at a requirement, they're going to the system and says, does this do this under these circumstances? When you're static testing, you're looking at the requirements and saying, is it SMART? Are there ambiguities? Is it decomposed so that it's testable? So what they're doing is they're looking at the requirements and saying, could I write a test case against this and know what the outcome should be? If they didn't, then they would log a defect, the BA would look at it, and then decide if a change was needed. Part of this is, like many companies, we use offshore testing. So going through, and we had to add the word valid because we were ground to a halt with the number of defects that were getting logged. We had a requirement that said the actors/users will be able to log in for a maximum period of 5 minutes. They logged a defect against that. It is impossible to divide actors by users. A little too literal. So we had a lot of that we had to work towards. So part of it was then educating our testing organization what valid requirements were. Yes?
At what phase were you doing that? During the development phase is when you actually...
Pre-design. Pre-sign-off. So at the point of sign-off, testing had to certify that they accepted that document and that all defects have been logged against it. Now you could go into design and then fix defects and do requirements change management afterwards, but no, their sign-off was required.
So you're calling this testing of the requirements versus testing of the solution?
Correct, absolutely.
So how did that work when you made the change from waterfall to agile? Did you just do it on sets?
So static testing was suspended during the creation of Agile, and it's about to be re-implemented. So next year here, hopefully we'll have a good answer for you. So part of it will be, if you're doing sprints, if you're doing, what you would do is you would set up iterative static testing. So through each period, your testers and your leads should be getting clarifications, asking questions, logging those, so that your user stories, so that your requirements are called out. Also, your developers and testers often become SMEs of the system, so they often will help you find out where your missed requirements are. The other was less than 2% UAT defects due to requirements. This is our favorite part of the project where the stakeholder sits down in front of the system and says, that isn't what I paid for. That wasn't what I wanted. We wanted to make sure that your requirements, you had hit what the stakeholders wanted. We wanted to make sure we had that alignment and that they were valid. Now with this, one of the things you're seeing is percentages not core numbers. It doesn't say less than 20 UAT defects due to requirements. We've had arguments with the testing organization that wanted to set up numbers and set up thresholds. To us, the only valid threshold is percentages. And the reason being is some projects are smaller, some projects and some BAs elaborate in a much greater detail. So if you have a 10,000 requirements, your 2% is quite a few. You got a lot of room to play with, but it's reflective of your work. It's setting a bar and a quality measure. We also wanted to set job aids, knowledge base, and templates covering 75% of all expected activities. Now the reason we picked that was, again, it was a cost benefit. We figured that about half to 75% of what BAs did was consistent and predictable enough that we should be able to support it. 25% is something wild and crazy, and it's just not worth the effort of trying to develop a template or a business or for a one-off solution. So that's where we drew the line, and we figured if we got 75% coverage, we'd be in really good shape.
Question.
Yes?
What do you do for repositories on your job?
I'm sorry?
What do you do for a repository?
Which tool? We actually used a combination, primarily with SharePoint, but we also used IBM's Rational Composer. Basically, it's their tool. We built our whole methodology out of the Rational suite. So it was all the steps, all the processes, all the flows. So that was our primary repository. And then just for convenience, because we couldn't push information as easily to that, if it was a standard, it went into our SDLC. If it was supporting information, it went into SharePoint, and we cross-referenced. Yep?
Do you have any, if you have a new BD or a junior BD, what do you do for onboarding?
They get a laptop, we throw them to the wolves, and wish them good luck. Isn't that
At least they get a
how we do it? So part of it would be pairing them with a senior BA to help them, and everything was really driven off our methodology. So they would pull up our SDLC, they would click through the process steps, they could look at it by roles, they could look at it by templates, so the information was there. Since then, we've dramatically simplified that to make it even easier because it got too robust. The group tried to document the world and it became confusing and not used. So really it was giving them a framework and then call outs where there was examples. So business requirement specification, there were all the different components, and then those components had examples that we kept in SharePoint, but they were cross-referenced. Yes?
So even with B to T as an accelerator, can you give me an understanding of how long it took to get to 75%?
I'll tell you when we get there. So from our original methodology, I'd say 2 to 3 years. But I would also say in that we spent a lot of time, we have stuff there, but I don't like what's there. So there were a lot of areas where we really needed to rebuild it. So in the first 2 years of having a community of practice, we rebuilt probably 50% of the core activities and core templates and processes. We added, I'd say, over the next 2 years, the next 25%, and then started going back and looking at the stuff that was original and we went through several different times where you build up your methodology, you build up your knowledge base, and then you've got to shrink it back down into something that's usable. You just can't have hoarders IT style. You've got to get it simplified so that people can use it. And so that was the cycle we've gone on, and then that cycle completed again 2 years ago, and it's about to happen again. Yes?
What's the size of your team that we're talking about?
So our FTE BAs at the time was right around 80 to 90 usually, and then contract doubled it, and then if you count business BAs which weren't part of this activity, double it again. So our BA organization is probably running 250 across, that we deal with. Okay? So one of the things we did as a company was said, when we're doing things, we've got to keep the customer in the center of the room. We've got to think that every action we do is impacting our customers. Well, our customer as an influence, as a change agent, was the BA. So we had to put the BA in the room, so what better hero for our BAs than BA Baracus? For those that are as old as I am. So we had to say, what is it that the BA needs to be successful? How will the BA know that they were successful? Being able to recognize success is really difficult, especially for people that aren't sure of themselves or aren't sure of the environment. And the last, how will others properly engage the BA? We knew we had to answer these three questions, and that the BAs needed the skills, through training, through support, the tools, through our templates, knowledge base, through our requirements management system and test systems, and most importantly, the foundation for all of that was the authority. And the authority is the behavioral change that is the hardest thing you'll ever face. Hardest thing you'll ever do in the organization is getting the authority for the right people to do the right work. Yes?
Your BAs only working on projects in these work streams? Or do they work on business cases or any higher level initiatives?
No, mainly just the projects. Now they participate a bit in business cases, but we're still, the business case, before the inception phase was handled by the business, where they build a business case, they come up with the solution, they sign the contract, then engage us to find out why what they just bought isn't going to work. Not always, but more times than we like. So our IT groups, if there's an IT solution, are now stakeholders in the inception phase and drive that phase out. So we are working through them with the business case, putting in the IT numbers, helping them drive out the returns, giving them examples. And now we have a new enterprise architecture team that is aligning long-term goals and tool usage across multiple work streams and business domains. So instead of 20 different people using the same tool, we are now driving them to shared services so that people can use those same tools. And they're not always happy, but they're now seeing the results and the lower cost that what could have cost teams $5 to $6 million to implement a case management solution, I can now deliver to them for $500,000 to $750,000. So dramatic gains there. Back.
What type of financial models do you have for this? You charge that to the business when being for our projects?
So every business unit, all funding is at the business. The business, an LOB segment, has a corresponding technology segment to support them. They select how much of their funding they're going to invest in IT and IT solutions. There's a segment manager that matches up to a business information officer or bio. They decide the prioritization of funding. That goes through a lot of cycles and reviews, and then that gets forecast out into the work streams that are going to do the work. We're on an annual funding cycle, but we're trying to move to a quarterly one to be able to adjust. So next year we're implementing a puts and takes model so that rather than over forecasting for the entire year, we've forecasted as best as we can, and we will transfer money between budgets as business prioritization changes. So projects will stop and start throughout the year or delay, or as projects run over, others may delay, and that will be done at the management level with support from the rest of us. Sir?
Just to follow that up.
Yep.
What percentage of that project budget is assigned to BA? Do you have a guideline, do you have a standard to say
Nope.
X percent?
Up to the project. So we have some areas where I'd say BA work could run 20, maybe 25% of the project. Overall, if you include testing is basically 25% of your cost. Development, 25 to 50% depending on the solution, and the rest BA and project management. In my particular space that I manage now, we're using a lot of vendor-driven solutions and vendor work, so I'm actually really light in BAs. I'm probably 5 to 10% of my project is BA work. It's more coordinating and getting in through the governance and the life cycles. Because we're using scripted solutions, it's more configuration management. But in other areas, it could be a lot more, and we're trying to drive that. I'm increasing my BA staffing because I want them more involved in the solution and creating repetitive onboarding that we can leverage across other clients. Okay. So one of the areas is you've got to have support or authority for change. And this is where it gets fun. If you don't have support, then you really kind of set up a community of practice and you start inserting the change and the improvement anywhere you can. Why? Because nobody ever turns down a volunteer. Nobody ever turns down somebody that's there to help them. So you can leverage that in your organization and find areas where you can get these successes. Capture those successes because it will build your case. Another presentation that you're welcome to watch that I've got on my website is how to implement a center of excellence in an extremely hostile environment. And this 2020 plan ended up being the reason we founded the COE. We couldn't get a COE approved for 2 years of trying. They didn't want it, they didn't like it, they thought that it had so much of a bad connotation in the organization. So we came up with these standards and a method of delivering these standards and said, this is where we're going to take our community by the year 2020. And they came back and they said, absolutely not. You don't have the authority to do that. That is the platform that needs to be delivered by a center of excellence. So go ahead and charter the center of excellence and this can be your platform. They're like, okay. We'll back into it. That's great. In our case, because we had a matrix model, we had to have the development managers who were responsible for the roles, and our project management office who controlled the governance, the standards for the project. They were equal contributors, equal stakeholders. We drove the work, but we drove it with their support. We had checkpoints. They helped align and advise us on our goals and our prioritization, but really, we were carrying the heavy load. So if you don't have that, again, a community of practice is kind of a way of slipping that in. This might not map up. If you just have one group, you may have a single stakeholder. I've seen organizations where they have a single stakeholder and they want to implement a community of practice or a center of excellence and have them drive this forward. Then you've got the authority, you've got the work. Just make sure you've got the checkpoints and the reviews and you're showing the value of each step. Yes?
How do we select the members for the Center of Excellence?
We made the decision that you had to be the equivalent of a lead or senior business analyst. Preferably you were an employee because we wanted to retain that work, but we did open it up to select contractors as well. And really it was somebody that had the aptitude and the willingness to put in the extra effort because we had no budget. So everything we did was 100% volunteer, which meant we really had to get people that would fit this work into their daily job, use their projects as a way of creating these artifacts. Like if I'm coming up with a new template for use cases, if I've got a project that's doing use cases, I can build that template while I'm building it out, and then turn that into a generic template with review. And I've got the process on the next slide. So with this, we decided that we set 5 firm must-have steps that had to be in criteria before we would accept any change into our group. It had to allow the BA to complete work faster, easier, and more accurately. We weren't going to do anything that was going to add more work, extend time, make things harder, and that one killed a lot of the ideas or made us really rethink what it was we were trying to do. It had to be implemented in under 3 months or 160 hours. For us, that was the time period we thought we could get this done on a volunteer basis, which was 160 man-hours or a 3-month duration. If it was longer, it either needed to be funded as a project or decomposed into quicker wins. We needed to start making decisions based on data, not anecdotes. We were a very anecdotal organization. Everybody knew what the answer was and how to get there. The data was always going to be the biggest stumbling block we had and the hardest thing to measure. I don't know that there's many things harder than to try and measure project performance and get the right results, because every time we put a measure in, it drives the wrong behavior because people are really good at gaming systems. And that's been a challenge for us. Requirements churn, requirements volatility. They're just fingernails on a chalkboard to me because people attribute too much value to them. The last is it had to enforce our governance, compliance, and standards. We couldn't build things that were going to break the methodology, the standards, we're in a highly regulated business, so we had to enforce those. However, if we change the standard, that counts, because that's the new standard, therefore it's accepted. So we just had to make sure if it didn't fit, we had to show why the standard needed to change. So when you're executing the vision, one of the hardest parts, although for a BA this should be a no-brainer, stakeholder analysis. What are all the areas, what are all the touch points and contacts that your solution or change is going to be? So for the people here at the beginning who are saying they're doing something, they're marching in this direction, they've got their goals and how they're getting there, bounce the list and take a second look. Take a quarterly look at your list and make sure you're hitting all the right stakeholders. First was people. We knew that the volunteers in the COE had to be willing to do the work. Our development managers had to fit into the development plan. The PMO controlled the process and standards. The BAs themselves had to be willing to change. And then the cross-role impacts. This is a list that can go on forever. For us, we knew it was the delivery managers, the business sponsors, especially the PM, the developers and QA testers, and architecture. Basically, the project participants had to be on board as we were changing and rolling these things out. When we rolled out a new way of doing non-functional requirements to help people, we sat down with our physical engineering team to make sure that if we captured stuff in a certain way, could they translate that into a physical design? So they adapted a lot. We also had a problem that every time something goes wrong, what do? You add it to the BA's task list and blame them. We had to stop that. We had to redirect a lot of our work to the groups that truly owned it. Process and methodology was an impact. The templates, the training, any guidance or job aids. And then the final one was reporting. We had to make sure that we were hitting all the areas where our work physically existed outside of a human body. Yes? Hey, Carol.
We talked about development. We talked a bit about what you need your business analysts themselves. But what kind of goals have you set up for your development managers? Because for us, people that manage those business analysts, they don't understand and have knowledge and skills and expertise around business analysis practices. Generally, it tends to get reflected on how quickly the people underneath them grow. So what goals would you set for that role?
So at the time, because we had dedicated development managers over the BAs, we had a group that had a peer connection to the delivery managers who were executing the work and could provide that coaching, that explanation. When we decentralized, it fell apart, and now we saw the quality, the perception of quality drop off, the consistency drop off. So what's happening? I believe we're going to go back to a matrixed organization for PMs and BAs, at least in those roles. So we quickly saw that we lacked the continuity, we were getting that change, and so at a high level, the organization said, I think we're going to go back to the old model. But absolutely, that's a big challenge. And it's a challenge we have today, and one of our areas is by supporting the work stream managers. There's at least one work stream manager under every delivery manager. They could provide the feedback and continuity through their one-on-ones to try and standardize, so we just had to coach and support them so they could carry, or again, do an intervention. Yes?
So just to confirm, you went through all 4 steps, right? So you started out decentralized,
Yep.
and you went matrix,
Yep.
and you're decentralized, and now you're going to go back matrix.
Yes. We call that our major and minor releases. Every 3 years we do a major transformation. Every year to 2 years we do a minor transformation where we readjust and catch everything that we messed up during the transformation.
Is that primarily because of change in management, as you mentioned earlier? Or is there one way better to go?
In different companies, yes, I think that a matrix versus dedicated does make a difference. If you have areas where you have extreme need for domain knowledge, it makes sense to have dedicated teams. In most broad IT organizations, at least a supplemental matrix group, I think makes sense. So yes, part of it is management change. Some of it is the perception of why certain problems are existing. As maturity pulled up in our release and testing, it exposed more vulnerability in financial management and BA and PM practices. So the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, which group needs to improve. And now it's our turn again. So we're running real close to time here, so let me Zip. So let me just walk through this. We set up a change flow that was documented so that we had a task prioritization chart that had criteria, we ranked it, and then wouldn't get into a sponsor. So we'd receive a request, we'd evaluate and clarify to make sure we understood what it was. It would be prioritized against the criteria. A lead would have to take ownership of it. If we did not have a lead, it wasn't any good. That lead was responsible for assembling their volunteer team. They then came up with a solution, and that solution then went into a cycle of review and development until we felt that it was ready to push forward for approval. Approval had to come from whoever the stakeholders or owners were for that particular change. We then implemented it and then continued for at least a year to measure and evaluate that tool and to look what changes were needed. So pretty basic flow there. So let me talk just a second about commander's intent, because when you're talking about goal setting, this is a organizational technique that is very valuable. So the military spent millions and millions of dollars developing this. In the old days, they used to develop massively thick battle plans that told you under every circumstance, where every soldier, where every box of macaroni and cheese would be at any time during a certain deployment or in a certain battle or whatever. They also had a saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You can never plan out a project, an organization, anything to a detailed level that will end up working. So instead they came up with commander's intent. And this is also, this is featured in another book by Dan and Chip Heath called Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Are Memorable. Basically, whoever your lead is, they set what the goal is and what the constraints are. What are the constraints? What's the time frame? So if I was setting the goal for this room, and I said, during the snack break, we are going to control who has access to the snacks, and only allowing them through if they know the password. Right now, with no more information than that, other than the time of the snacks, and that you can't use physical violence, you guys could achieve that goal. When you broke into groups, if we assembled into teams, each team lead could then say, okay, we're going to take the north side of the table. We're going to take the corridor. We're going to block the escalator. You guys would then come up with what your goals are. So 10 minutes before break time, you will have control over the escalator. What that means is any individual on your team knows if they're the only person who showed up, they know what they need to do. And if they have the foundation, the tools, the processes, the training to support them, they have a good chance of being successful. So part of it is by continuing to align what the goal is, saying what the constraints, decomposing that to whatever additional levels of constraints or timing is needed to succeed, your people will continue to self-align. Allow your people who are good at problem solving to adapt and overcome. So that's a technique that I recommend. In the presentation that's available for download, there's a couple books that I highly recommend. They are not all directly related to VA or change management, but I believe they will give you a great foundation for being successful. There's a company profile that I'm required to show on for SunTrust. And then please stay connected. Through the BBC website, you're able to download all the presentations for speakers that have made them available. This one's available now. It's also available over my site. I've got cards up front if you want, but please feel free to stay connected on LinkedIn. And I hope you really enjoy the conference. Is there anything that somebody felt that they just didn't get out of this session and it was just average or below? Because I want to get that out of the way right now. I want to make sure everyone came away with something great, something valuable that they can take away and tell people about. All right, thank you so much. Y'all have a great conference.